Namaste children, this is Paramjit Sharma from the Department of English, and today we are going to take up the chapter named Lost Spring Stories of Stolen Childhood, written by Anis Jung, a famous Indian journalist and writer. She received her education in Hyderabad as well as in USA. She began her career as a writer in India, and then she became a writer for a number of major newspapers in India and abroad. Seven Sisters, Breaking the Silence, and many more books of this kind made her quite popular with the readers, among the readers. This particular topic is an excerpt from her book named Lost Spring Stories of Stolen Childhood. In this excerpt, the writer has highlighted and analyzed the grinding poverty, old traditions and lack of education which force the poor children to live a life of exploitation. She's highlighted that there's a dire need to provide these children a chance to receive education and to lead a life of dignity, a life where they can dare to dream and act freely. The first part of this chapter has been titled, Sometimes I Find a Rupee in the Garbage. It is the story of a rag picker named Sahib-e-Alam who doesn't even understand the meaning of his name, but he has the dream to grow, to get a chance to go to a school. When the writer met Sahib, she asked him why had he taken up the task of picking the rags. Why do you do this? I asked Sahib, whom I encounter every morning, scrounging for gold in the garbage dumps of my neighborhood. She had often found him looking for useful things in the garbage dump near her house. Then she shares with the readers that Sahib had left his home long ago. He belonged to a green area of Dhaka, but he doesn't even have a distant memory of her homeland. There were many storms that swept away their fields and homes because of natural calamities damaging their crops, their houses. They had to move to another place. They had to give up their own land in order to go settle somewhere else so that they could save themselves from the natural calamities. Sahib answered that he had nothing else to do. Then she suggested him to go to a school, but Sahib answered that there was not even a single school in his neighborhood where he could go and study. And then she asked him if he would like to join the school if she opened one. She started a school. Sahib was quite happy to hear that and he agreed at once. And then a few days later, he came running up to the writer and asked if her school was ready. She felt embarrassed because she had made a promise which she never intended to keep. Then she just thought of an excuse and answered that it took a long time to build a school. But she also realized that promises like that are often made to such poor children. After months of knowing him, she asked him his name, and he told his name was Sahib-e-Alam, and he didn't even know the meaning. His name was quite contradictory to his situation. His name meant the Lord of the universe, but he was a poor rag picker who did not have proper clothes or shoes to wear. and he roamed the streets with his friends, a group of barefoot boys who appeared like the morning birds. They used to start their work early in the morning and they would disappear at noon because they had some other tasks to be performed. Over the months, she had come to recognize each of them. One day she asked him why he wasn't wearing any footwear. He answered that his mother had not brought them down from the shelf. They had not bought them. The mother had not bought any footwear for him. And then he added that even if she had done so, he would have thrown them off because they were not habitual of wearing footwears. We can understand that that was just an excuse because he had never got a chance to wear footwear, any kind of shoes or chappals. The writer has added that travelling across the country, she had seen several children walking bare feet. According to them, it was not lack of money but a tradition to stay barefoot. But she wondered if it was just an excuse. And she could guess that it was just an excuse because they could not afford to buy footwear. Then the writer goes on to talk about a story a man from Udilbi once told her. As a young boy, that man would always go to the school past a temple where his father was a priest. He would stop briefly at the temple and pray for a pair of shoes. 30 years later, when she visited the town and the old temple, which was now drowned in an air of desolation. Not many people visited that temple. There she found that the new priest lived there in the backyard. There were red and white plastic chairs, symbolically showing some growth, some achievement on the part of the people living there. A young boy dressed in a grey uniform and wearing socks and shoes arrived panting and threw his school bag on a folding bed. This shows that the priest, who had grown old now, had children and grandchildren who went to school in proper school uniform. Looking at the boy, she remembered the prayer another boy, the old priest, had made to the goddess when he had finally got a pair of shoes. Let me never lose them. The goddess had granted his prayer. Young boys like the son of the priest now wore shoes, but such people whose wishes had come true were very less in number, and there were many others like the rag pickers in her neighborhood who were still shoeless. They did not have proper clothes or shoes to wear, so their life was still full of a number of difficulties. The writer goes on to describe that her acquaintance with the barefoot rag pickers led her to Simapuri. She describes it as a place on the periphery outskirts of Delhi, yet it was miles away from it metaphorically, because as compared to Delhi, this place had not seen any growth or development. Those who lived there were migrants who came from Bangladesh back in 1971. Sahib's family was also among those migrants. Simapuri was not at all developed at that time, but it was full of a number of people because around 10,000 rag pickers lived there in structures of mud with roofs of tin and tarpaulin, and their houses, that locality was devoid of sewage, drainage or running water. They have lived there for more than 30 years without an identity, without permits, but they owned ration cards. They had been given ration cards so that they could get their names on the voters list and they could buy grain. This highlights the lack of apathy on the part of the government. They had been given ration cards so that they could be counted amongst the voters, but no other benefits they received. For the rag pickers or for these migrants, it was important to be able to get grains and other things on subsidized rates, but they were not very particular about getting their identity cards. Getting grains, getting food to eat was more important than getting an identity. When she asked them why they had left their beautiful land of green fields and rivers, they answered that they would rather live there in those slums. At least because they were at least able to get some food. They could not do anything with the land that they owned that could not even feed them. So wherever they found food, they pitched their tents and that became their transit homes. Their children grew up in those small huts and they became partners in survival. And survival in Simapuri meant rag picking. So when the children grew up, they helped their parents in earning a little bit by helping them in rag picking. Through the years, it had acquired the art of rag picking had acquired the proportions of a fine art, because garbage to them was gold. It was their daily bread which helped them survive. But for a child it was more, because sometimes they would find something interesting, sometimes a 1 rupee coin or a 10 rupee note. So it was quite interesting for the children to do that task, because they were hopeful of finding things that would be useful to them. Though for the parents it was just a means of survival. One winter morning, the writer found Sahib standing by the fenced gate of the neighborhood club as he was watching young men dressed in white as they were playing tennis. He told her that he liked the game and he was really satisfied to watch it while standing outside the fence, and he also admitted that when there was no one around, the gatekeeper sometimes allowed him to use this swing. Sahib was also wearing tennis shoes at that time. They looked strange and discolored. They looked strange and did not match with his discolored shirts and shorts. Then he explained it to the writer that someone had given those shoes to him, and the writer could understand that some child from a rich family must have discarded those shoes because of a hole. But for Sahib it was like a blessing. It was a great thing to be able to wear shoes even if the shoes had a hole. So that hole did not bother him at all, because he had walked barefoot almost all the time. So getting a pair of shoes was like a blessing. After a few days, the writer found Sahib on his way to the milk booth. He was carrying a steel container in his hand, and he told the writer that he now worked at a tea stall and he earned 800 rupees and all his meals. When the writer asked him if he liked his job, his face showed that he had lost that carefree look, because he was really burdened by the long work hours and the burden of the work. The steel canister seemed quite heavier than the plastic bag he would carry so lightly. The bag was his. He was his own master when he was a rag picker. But now, because he was serving at a working at a tea stall. He had to work from early in the morning to late in the night, but the workload was too much for a child of his age. The bag was his, the canister belonged to the man who owned the tea shop. Sahib was no longer his own master. The writer has highlighted that he did get a chance to grow, but it could not be called real growth and development because he was all the more burdened by the work at tea stall, by the longer working hours and the burden of too much work. Though he got a fixed amount, but he was no longer his own master. He had lost his freedom.